which are currently not weighted, but are, you know, a population that we need to be thinking through or understanding the impacts of any changes. Okay. So in terms of data that we would want to see, you know, I think what the House passed, there are clear changes to specific, you know, weights and numbers that were derived. And I haven't looked closely, Elizabeth, I don't know if anyone has come to VASBO or if you guys have done any modeling of the impact of those, but you know, I think for me, I'm always like, have these new formulas been modeled in any way? Because
yeah, nobody has brought us any kind of, you know, formal modeling, like, you know, for all districts. I think each individual current district may be looking at their own modeling, but of course, when they do that, they're not doing it in a future state, right? They're doing it, what is it like today? Like if that happened right now and we are still our current district, what would that look like for us? And I think the biggest concern with going from like the funding formula with the 13,000, you know, that's kind of in the governor's bill is that the difference appears to be, even though the Colby model has a higher base to it.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that special education is included in the Colby model, and it wasn't included in the base of the other model. So if you're saying a difference between $13,000 a student and $15,000 a student, well, right now, every school district receives approximately 2,000 something for every for every student, average daily membership, right? Every student, but that's for their special education. It's not based on the students that are designated as special ed, but it's on all students, but that's the amount in their census block grant. So it would appear to me that the funding really isn't any different between the two models if special education is in one and if it isn't in the other. So I feel like someone at the level of, I mean, maybe agency of ed or someone like that needs to do kind of a modeling of each situation for all of us, because, and I feel like in order for all of us to understand it, although I understand that they want to look at it in a future state, I think we need to see the data as it sits today. What would it look like if we didn't redistrict with these models? And not to be scary, you know, not to put it out there and be like, oh, this can't work. It's putting the data out there with like the caveat that we understand this is not what it would really look like, because you're also incorporating a governance structure change and other changes. But just to say, this is what it would look like if you all stayed your own, you all kept your same buildings, you all ran your same schools, you all had your same districts. And it gives an acknowledgement of other things need to change in order to make that work.
Well, it helps to illuminate that overlap, right? For people who say, no, it's just the funding, being able to model the impact on existing state can help build more support for, gee,
for the other changes that have to happen
on our own.
Yeah. Right. And I think the reason why people don't want to model it, people don't want to give that model of both as the current state, is because they think it's going to generate nobody supporting either plan. And I don't really agree with that. I feel like it gives you a base and it gives you that acknowledgement that in order to make either of those plans work or anything in between, you have to adjust other things that we've already agreed need to be changed. And right now it's kind of nebulous. It's like, do we, like you said, everyone's kind of like, well, do we really need to change anything, or can we just adopt this funding formula? And I think people need to see why you can't just adopt the funding formula.
it's helpful to hear this discussion because, yeah, I've been more privy to the concerns of, showing a foundation formula on a district that won't exist anymore because of, like how eye-popping it would be without layering on those, scale and governance changes that, I think drive both the House and administration models of like why this would even work. But it's interesting to hear the flip side of like, yeah, that could actually make the connection stronger, because that is the connection that I think, Zoe rightly is concerned folks aren't making, that this only works in a certain context where schools are operating differently. I will, so like then taking a step back, the ability to do that modeling is something that we're still laying the groundwork for. And by we, I really should say AOE, because tax won't be involved in really like the weights and foundation formula pieces. We're more on the like, how does that translate to how much would need to be raised from various tax rates side. But I know that as of Friday, at least, the agency had not had data from the Joint Fiscal Office to come to do like a comparison between like what was in the agency's proposed base and weights compared to the and like that's high on everyone's mind. So I'm anticipating that work's going to be underway, this week for sure. But that was kind of like the priority ask as of Friday. Like, let's get that moving. Just to let you both know where we are with that, where they are with that.
Right. And I feel like even to some extent, whatever they model out, I would say don't even try to predict like what people's counts will be for a future year or any of that. Like just use, FY25, ADM or whatever for everybody as they are today. It'll just give everyone in the field a real healthy sense of where it will work and where it won't.
Right. And you can start to drill down into subpopulations even within a district. Rebecca, right. Can you stop sharing and I'll share my notes? Yeah. That way you guys
the other risk of when I share never
you guys can see what I've captured so far. And anyway, let me know if you think we need to add anything. I do think we need to I know Wilmer modeled, who's the superintendent at Winooski, modeled the impact of the new sort of tiered structure for multilingual learners for Winooski, and the conclusion was that we were not going to lose, it was a sort of a neutral impact. But it was funny because we had a couple of our House members send us, there was a floor amendment, and we were all like misunderstanding what the floor amendment was, thought it was on the fly making changes to the ML weights. But so some of the observations that I shared moving to the tiered structure is when you're basing funding, particularly for multilingual learners, which I think is a very unique population, based on students' level of proficiency, you're sort of ignoring one main purpose of a lot of the programming that we run at the school district is more about reaching parents and communicating with parents and making sure they have access to both translation, interpretation, but also sort of being cultural brokers between. So you could have students who are fluent in English or whose proficiency has put them at sort of needing the lowest level of support, but whose parents still really require a lot of support in order to effectively engage. So, I think, again, Winooski is not the only, and Burlington are not the only districts serving these populations. I think as families have moved into other districts across the state, or resettlement has happened in other communities, those districts are sort of just building their programming right now. And I'm interested in what their modeling is showing about their ability to maintain programming if you move into sort of a tiered calculation of, funding based on student proficiency. And I have the same question around special education, right? Because that was another decision that was made in the House to sort of have funds. Not only are we tying them to the number of students that need special education services, which is a big shift from the census block grant we've been operating under, but now we're keying it off of need. And I think Oliver was asking some good questions last time, like, will this lead to an increase in identification of, types of disabilities based on, where resources are driving the conversation, access to resources as opposed to.
Right. And if you just use a count of students on IEPs, that doesn't tell you what their needs are, because one student may have really high needs and one student might be just at the border and doesn't have a ton of needs, but they're still on an IEP, as far as like the cost drivers of whatever it is that student needs can be really vastly different.
Right. So you guys can see what I'm typing here. Look, I know Tammy did some model, but we haven't seen, and it's really left to each individual business manager to run those calculations and give input. We haven't seen a statewide model, which again, I think.
Well, and there again, each of us running it on our own is us trying to, evaluate our own understanding of what it all means.
Right.
And if they were to do a kind of modeling of it, it would help each one of us go and look at it and say, oh yeah, I did it right. Or, oh no, I did this wrong. I misunderstood this part. And you have no way to know if we're doing it right or wrong.
Right. And I think, the other piece of this that if we move away from the House proposal and just think about the governor's proposal, was it $180 million? So there's a lot of money that's going to be saved.
I think.
But yet, I watched Zoe give a couple presidents but we want to increase salaries and we want to, it's like,
right.
It all sounds really good. And we're going to save, a lot of money. The dots have not been connected for folks about where's that savings coming from. And I think when we think about impact on underserved or underrepresented populations, it's really important that we know where's that money coming from.
Yeah.
And
I think,
oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that feels like a disappointing outcome that JFO, I guess, didn't have the green from, their legislative clients that they needed to do that full unpacking because, Zoe has shared though, how those assumptions are all within the foundation formula, and the foundation formula creates that savings by just not spending more than that, and showing here's where we're carrying the teacher, this is how we're carrying the cost of equal pay, or here's where we're carrying the small schools that we want to remain open. These are things I have no expertise on, but would have been cool to be able to see JFO saying yes, we can see this, and here's how the House is addressing this. So we're in the theme of data, that would be cool. We might have a fruitful couple weeks.
Yeah, I think the numbers from the governor's proposal rely on assumptions around scale that doesn't exist right now, right?
Yeah,
and so I think that's where moving from scale to brass tacks, this is what it would mean. And again, I think that modeling on the existing district structure could help build the understanding for why, our school would close because we don't have this kind of scale, or we could not afford this.
Right. And I think that that's the thing, is that there is some places, most places, where that scale may not be able to be achieved here. And then reality of even the conversation about, the governance structure changing assumes that some of that savings comes in because you're going to reduce central office staffing in a major way. But is it reality that a superintendent is going to travel all the way from Grand Isle down to Fairhaven and, be the administrator and overseer of that entire huge district? No one will even know who their superintendent is. They'll never meet them. They'll never recognize them. You'd have to have middle management positions in each region in order to accommodate that. It's just an impossible. And I think that the model assumes that is achievable, and I don't think it is. And so that's kind of a false sense of savings there. And then you go to like Northeast Kingdom, they're not going to be able to come up with a 4,000 student district that isn't, in the same situation where someone's having to, there's no scale achieved by that because they're not going to have the same transportation system. They're not even close to each other. None of the schools will be close to each other. So it's just, I think modeling it in the existing districts would point all of those things out.
Right.
And it might even point out where it can happen, what districts could consolidate and what ones really can't.
Or what buildings could.
Yeah, right. Buildings too, because
not,
there's the other thing is it assumes that you would close these 3 schools or whatever without picking, they're not picking. They're just basically saying, well, in an ideal framework, this is how this would all work. But within what exists, there's 50 schools in that huge location, and which ones are going to stay open, which ones are going to close, and then can the existing buildings that are there accommodate the closure of that group of schools?
Right.
Yeah.
And do folks feel like it would be valuable to see, what's my actual question here? I'm curious if like if from where you two sit in your expertise areas, if like the House and Gov proposals are both still in play enough that it would be interesting to see like kind of both modeled on more of like a 12 or 10, 11 district setting too. Because I know that, that's available on the administration side.
Yes, I think existing state and proposed future state would be really important for people to, if we're going to start to identify impacts on underrepresented populations in particular, the further away you get from those populations in terms of the modeling that you're using, the harder it is to really spot issues. So that's why, if you're looking statewide or, large regional districts, I think folks who are sort of on the ground implementing some programs that are designed to support, whether that be, like in Winooski, we've really moved to create more internal programming for special education students because so many of the community-based providers have closed recently. They're very expensive, right? And so we have moved away from paying tuition to external providers and have these sort of in-house districts or classrooms or programs. But we built a new school that allows for that. Like we have space, and I think it is a cheaper model, but it relied on a number of different things coming together, including the fact that the program closed and parents don't have an option. So a lot of parents will say, well, my child has an IEP that guarantees this placement or this service. I'm not going to give that up because I see benefits to my child. If the provider goes away, that's a different conversation at the IEP team level, right? And I think that was one of the issues with the census block grant theory. was like no plan for how IEP teams were going to navigate the fiscal pressure, whenever that's a legal document that a team needs to collectively agree, you know, for example, we're too reliant on paraprofessionals in the state. We know that. But if Johnny has a one-on-one in his IEP and the members of the team believe that he needs that in order to be successful, that's not coming. It doesn't matter with the money, with the budget issue, right? And so again, I think the further you get away from those like day-to-day decisions that get made within a school, the harder it is to really unpack what some of these impacts might be.
Yeah, there's a lot of complexity in those anecdotes. I do just want to like, I do feel like, you know, there's like things on the tax side that, you know, I try to keep in mind about this too, but it just feels like such a value add to go to a foundation formula structure where there's actually money being directed at the students themselves. You know, like understanding there's still a ton of distance, you know, in both models between, you know, where that money lands and where the student is. Like, very cool that it's there and not just, you know, hypothetical tax capacity.
Well, it's not tax capacity, right? And it's not subject to the sort of the will of the voters, at least for the base, right? We still have this unanswered question I have in the governor's proposal around, can the communities just vote to spend as much as, I think in the House bill, it was a 10% guardrail. I don't know. I don't remember what the governor's proposal said on that, if anything, but
I think we said it should be capped and left that as an open policy decision.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other challenge that they brought up was even in any model, no matter what model you go with in a larger district, and this still happens today, even in small districts, how do you measure whether or not the dollars are actually going to those students that not only need it, but are the ones that drove the amount of money you're getting? How do you make sure that, you know, the more affluent school in that district isn't getting more money than the school that was already existing, that was already struggling, that has some more high needs students in it? I don't know how they make rules so that districts are forced to put the money where it's supposed to go.
Right.
There will be a nice, you know, paper trail for better or worse, you know, what schools are generating those weights.
Right. What schools are generating the weights, and then what do we see? I feel like there needs to be some accountability. Like after this is all implemented and in place, all the school districts would need to report back on outcomes, you know, like what was their current state? How successful were they meeting the needs of students? And then some kind of measurable reporting back on how they did after it was implemented, so that you can ensure that the dollars are being spent appropriately on the students that have the needs, and that it's being impactful, that it's making a difference somehow. And I don't know how you do that.
So you know, if you can see my notes, I'm trying to capture.
I can't see your notes, Nicole.
You can't?
Sorry, I meant to. Yeah, and I don't. Is that?
I
No,
can.
I just be like me.
I can see them.
Is it like in your Teams, like next to our faces?
I said I'm sharing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see it. It's on the left, so I can see us on the right, just our little faces, and then I can see her notes on the left.
Okay, I must be doing something weird. I'll change my view up a bit.
It might be the view of your screen.
Yeah. Maybe. So we have like 2 minutes before we're going to be. Did I miss anything in these notes that you want to make sure we capture? Rebecca, you just
I don't think
going
so.
on trust here.
blind.
Oh, I just refreshed. There you are. Okay.
Well, there we are.
This would have been really helpful to guide my following of our conversation.
I think they're going to take us back in about a minute. Looks like.
Yeah. And I this is like a big question to drop in our last minute. So I'm just kind of throwing it out there that, like, you know, from just from my position as being someone who brings data to decision makers, I'm still trying to wrap my head around like a positive example of how seeing data at the district level could like help us determine where a foundation formula would work. I'm not like coming with disbelief. I'm just trying to like wrap my head around it.
I guess it's less around for me whether a foundation formula. To me, it's more
for a particular
what
formula,
are the
like
impacts with the numbers that are being proposed, with the amounts, both from a weight. It's not is it foundation or what we have right now. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with what we have right now is not working. So, but there's a lot, you know, the design of a foundation formula, there's a lot of options there. And I think being very explicit about the choices that are being made within the context of a foundation formula and the different impacts that that has. And from this
absolutely,
you know, conversations perspective, particularly on underrepresented populations, I think having the modeling would help.
Right.